I was standing in the produce aisle at Rose Hours, one hand resting on the cart handle. She was right beside me, holding a bag of green beans, clear plastic sleeve, already bundled, her finger pointed lightly at my chest. Not demanding, just present, and I said what I thought was nothing. "You cook, you listen. You're more patient than anyone I've ever known. You're going to make someone a really wonderful wife someday." She didn't blush or look away. She tilted her head, held my eyes with a smile so small it barely registered, and said, "Then why not you?" My hand didn't move. The aisle was loud, but I had stopped hearing any of it. "My name is Daniel Marsh. I am 41 years old, and I have lived in Bozeman, Montana for 12 years. The house is small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a kitchen I have largely rebuilt, and a workshop attached to the back that is, in honest terms, my actual home. I am a carpenter, freelance, no storefront, no employees. I make furniture, tables, chairs, bed frames, built-ins for kitchen renovations. I sell through 2 local shops and take commissions by word of mouth, and the work keeps me busy. I am up before 6 most mornings. The shop opens at 6:15, and within minutes the back of the property smells like pine shavings and strong black coffee, and I have decided that is as close to contentment as I am likely to locate on a weekday morning. 3 years ago my marriage ended. My ex-wife Renee and I went through it with a mediator, without a courtroom, which surprised people who knew us. We had no children. We had agreed on that early and never revisited it. In the mediator's office, asked to characterize the breakdown, Renee said I was too quiet, too inward, too content with small spaces and small routines. I considered objecting. Then I looked at her face and thought, she is not wrong. Quietness had been the recurring complaint for years before the end. By the time she said it out loud, it was simply the last time she would bother. I kept the house, the workshop, and a 40-acre parcel on the east side of the property my father had owned before me. In the months after the divorce finalized, I did what I know how to do. I worked. I fixed things that had needed fixing for years, rebuilt the kitchen shelving, relaid the hardwood floors when I found soft spots in the subfloor, replaced the porch railing, repainted the east trim. The house kept getting better and quieter. Nobody was around to notice. Nobody, that is, except Kara Voss. She lives next door, 12 meters at most from my front door to hers, close enough that on quiet mornings I can hear her porch door when it opens. She is 38 years old and teaches 2nd grade at Hawthorne Elementary, about 4 miles north of here. She drives a gray Subaru that has accumulated 3 hard Montana winters and is not done accumulating them. She keeps a small herb garden along the south side of her fence that has no business surviving this climate and has chosen to do so anyway. She is careful with her things, patient with problems, and does not make noise about either quality. She shops at Rose Hours every Wednesday afternoon. I know this because I tend to go at the same hour, and I had noticed her there before she ever noticed me. She checks produce the way someone does when they actually intend to use it, picking things up, turning them in hand, setting them back if they fail some internal standard I never asked about and she never explained. She does not buy things she cannot use before they turn. There is an economy to how she moves through a grocery store that I found, without quite deciding to, quietly admirable. She was paying attention to things in a way that most people skip over. I was paying attention to her. I told myself that was just awareness, the natural result of proximity. I told myself that for a long time. The first time she came to my door was about a month after the divorce finalized. I was in the particular fog of that period, not grief exactly, more like the disorientation of a house suddenly organized around one person rather than 2. Kara knocked on a Tuesday evening, holding a ceramic bowl of butternut squash soup covered with a plate to keep it warm. She said she had made more than she needed. Then, almost parenthetically, she mentioned she could hear my furnace cycling from her side of the fence, and it sounded rough. Did I have someone I could call? I said it was fine. She handed me the soup and said, if you change your mind, let me know. Then she left, without waiting to be thanked, without standing in the doorway to make sure I said the right thing. I stood at the kitchen counter and ate the entire bowl without sitting down. I could not fully explain why it felt like one of the most decent things anyone had done for me in a long time. But it did. I washed the bowl that night and left it on her porch the next morning. I need to be honest about something before I go further. During most of what I am about to describe, I was not paying the kind of attention I should have been. I noticed things. I observed them, filed them, assigned reasonable explanations to them, and moved on. This was a consistent pattern, and I maintained it with some effort, even when I was not fully aware of the effort I was making. I was not ready to look at what was directly in front of me, so I found other places to look. This is not an excuse. It is just the shape of what happened, and I think saying it plainly matters. The first time we ran into each other at Rosauer's was a few weeks after the soup. I came around the corner into the produce section and saw her a couple of meters away, holding 2 bags of green beans side by side, comparing them. I didn't call out. I stood there a moment longer than made any particular sense, and then she turned the way people do when someone nearby is very still, and she looked at me without any expression of surprise. She said, "You come at this time too?" I said I did. We walked through the checkout and out to the parking lot together, said brief goodbyes, and went to our cars. We didn't exchange more than a dozen sentences, but somewhere between the exit doors and my truck, I noticed I was not walking at my usual pace. I was moving slower. I was not in any hurry to reach the vehicle. I did not examine why until much later. After that, Wednesdays became something. Nothing arranged, nothing formally established, just a pattern that accumulated through repetition every week. The same hour, the same store, the same general corner of the produce section. I began to notice more details about her. She picked up peaches and pressed them lightly before choosing. She compared expiration dates on identical containers and took the one further out. She put items back on the shelf facing forward. She smelled fresh herbs before she put them in the cart. These are small acts, unremarkable individually, but over weeks and months, the accumulation of small, unremarkable acts tells you something real about a person. It tells you they are paying attention. It tells you they care about the details as a matter of course rather than performance. She was tending to things, quietly and without announcement. I was taking note without admitting I was taking note. One Wednesday in early December, she put a bag of coffee in her cart. The specific kind I drink, a dark roast in a matte brown paper bag from a small Missoula roaster. I had been buying that brand for years. She had never bought it before, as far as I had seen. She dropped it in without looking at me, without any signal that it was connected to me. I told myself she was trying something new. I drove home and parked in the driveway, and sat there for several extra minutes before going inside. I did not examine what I was sitting with. That was, on reflection, a choice even if I was not naming it as one. The fence repair happened in September. A storm moved through with more wind than the forecast had suggested, and 3 boards on the back of my fence line gave out and fell into my yard. I was out there the following afternoon with the post hole digger when I heard the grass shift on the other side, and Kara stepped through the gap. She looked at the damage for a moment. She was quiet. Then she went back to her house and returned 2 minutes later with a hammer and a coffee can of nails that rattled when she carried it. She said, "Can I hold the boards while you drive them?" That was the full extent of the negotiation. We worked for close to 40 minutes. She held each board in position, found the right placement without instruction, held it steady until I was done, and moved to the next one. When we finished, she dusted her palms on her jeans, looked at the fence line, said, "Straighter than the old one." Then she went inside. I stayed in the yard for a while, leaning against the new post. There was something noticeably lighter in my chest than there had been before she came out. I told myself it was the satisfaction of a finished job. I was still telling myself that an hour later, a few weeks after the fence, she told me about one of her students. The class had been doing family portraits, crayons, white paper, the classic elementary school project. One little girl finished hers and looked up at Kara and asked, with the direct simplicity that second graders specialize in, whether the teacher had a home. Kara laughed, telling it the laugh of someone who has been seen too clearly by a 7-year-old. She said she told the girl, "Yes, I have a home, but it isn't quite full yet." I nodded and said something about how houses always have room for another project. She looked at her food and smiled without correcting me. I understand now, without ambiguity, that she was not talking about projects or square footage. The child had asked a better question than she knew, and Kara had answered it honestly, and I had taken the most convenient available interpretation and filed it away. I thought about these things separately for a long time before I started to notice that they formed a pattern. Kara was not performing consideration. She was not doing the things you do when you want someone to notice you are doing them. She just did what made sense in each moment, without needing credit for it, without standing around afterward to see whether it landed. That is a rare quality, and I had spent most of my adult life undervaluing it. I had spent years with someone who announced her gestures, who wanted acknowledgement as a condition of the gesture itself. That was not wrong of Renee, it was just who she was. But I had not understood, until I was living next to the opposite of it, how much I had been craving exactly this. Someone who helped because helping was the right thing, and then simply moved on. Kara moved on. Every time. The soup, the fence, the coffee, she slid into her cart without making it a moment. She moved on. And somehow the moving on was the part that stayed with me longest. The Wednesday it happened was in October. There is a particular quality to the afternoon light in Bozeman, in fall low, amber, the kind that makes things feel slightly suspended. I came down the produce aisle and found Kara at the green bean display, holding a bag, and something loosened in me when I looked at her standing there in that light. I said the words. I said she cooked well and she listened and she had more patience than anyone I'd encountered, and she was going to make someone a really wonderful wife. She looked at me without blinking, with that small, still smile, and said, "Then why not you?" Then she put the bag in her cart and moved toward the registers. Like she'd said something ordinary. I drove home in a silence that had weight. That night I lay on my back and went through it all: the coffee, the fence, the soup, the slow walk to the parking lot, 3 years of Wednesday afternoons. It wasn't her question keeping me awake. It was the fact that I was searching, carefully and genuinely, for a single honest reason to answer it with no, and I could not find one. I had been treating the space between us as a boundary. I was out of reasons to keep doing that. I had lived 12 meters from this woman for 3 years. It took a throwaway line in a grocery store to make me understand what I had been working, without admitting it, not to understand. The phone call from Renee came 1 week after the grocery store Thursday morning, while I was running stock through the table saw. I killed the machine and picked up. Her voice was exactly as I remembered, quick, certain, no preamble. She had heard I was getting close to the school teacher next door. I did not ask who told her. Bozeman is not a large city, and things travel between front yards at a pace that continues to surprise people who have not lived here long. 4 days after the call, she drove down from Missoula. I came around from the shop and she was standing at the front door, leather jacket, the expensive bag, hair as smooth and composed as it had been at every mediation session. She said, "We need to talk, Daniel." I held the door. She came in. What she wanted was not reconciliation. I want to say that plainly because it matters to what follows. Renee was there about the land, the 40 acres on the east boundary that my father had left me, which her attorney now claimed had been inadequately addressed in the original settlement agreement. She had documentation. She had an argument constructed around it, and somewhere in that construction, she had decided to use Kara as a point of leverage. "Are you actually serious about that woman?" she said. And before I could do anything with that, she turned down the assistant principal position last year. "Did you know? People at that school say she lacks ambition, that she is satisfied staying small." I looked at Renee across the table. I said, "That's part of why I like her." She pivoted without acknowledging what I'd said. She told me Kara had told a colleague several removes of second hand that she didn't know what she wanted her life to look like in 3 years. "That is not a stable person," she said. "That is someone who hasn't figured herself out." Is that really where you want to invest your time? The word invest. She always reached for that word when she meant something else entirely. Kara got home from school while Renee was still there. We had moved outside, and I saw the gray Subaru pull into the next driveway. Kara climbed out with her school bag and a paper grocery sack balanced against her hip. She looked across and saw us. Renee turned on the kind of smile that is really an assessment at cataloging. Kara looked back, gave a small and even nod, and walked to her own front door. She did not speed up. She did not flinch. She crossed her yard with the same unhurried self-possession she brought to everything, unlocked her door, and went inside. I stood watching. I found I was paying significantly more attention to how she walked across that grass than to anything Renee had been saying. I thought, standing there watching her walk across her yard, about how many times I had observed Kara doing exactly that, moving through something without letting it define her. She had been doing it for the entire time I had known her. The first winter after I moved back into the house alone, there had been a week of pipes and frozen ground, and everything going wrong at once, and she had come over one morning with a bag of groceries and set it on the porch without knocking, as if she didn't want to make me acknowledge that I needed something. She had done it so quietly that I hadn't seen her do it. I just found the bag. I knew it was her. She never mentioned it. I never thanked her directly, because I wasn't sure what I would be thanking her for, without also saying out loud that I had noticed what she was doing. Renee was calculating the value of Kara against some scale that had nothing to do with any of this. I stood at Kara's door a moment after she said that, and thought about what it means when someone chooses not to make your problem about themselves. Renee had made my quietness about herself for years. It was a deficit in what she was receiving, a failure of provision on my part. Kara had never once made my anything about herself, not the furnace, not the fence, not Renee standing in the yard. She had asked if I was okay, and she had meant it the way it sounds when it is actually meant as an inquiry about the state of a person, rather than an opening for a conversation about her own discomfort with the situation. I had not been asked that question by someone who meant it that way in a long time. I stood in her doorway and felt something shift in a way I did not have language for yet, but I was beginning to understand was not going away. After Renee left, she did not stay long once it became clear I was not going to be useful to her case. I walked across the yard and knocked. Kara answered with a book open in her other hand, thumb holding her page. I said, "I'm sorry she was in your eyeline." Kara shook her head. "That's not yours to apologize for." Then she looked at me directly at me, not at the situation behind me, and asked, "Are you okay?" Not, "What is happening with the land dispute?" Not, "That must be complicated." Just, "Are you okay?" I stood at her door a beat or two longer than necessary, thinking about the last time someone had asked me that question, and meant the person rather than the circumstances. I said I was getting there. She said okay, and that was sufficient. That night, Renee sent an email with the legal documents attached. The final sentence read, "Think practically, Daniel, don't let a passing feeling cost you something real." Passing feeling. I read that phrase twice. She had always named what I experienced as temporary, as something that would resolve itself if I applied enough rational thinking to it, as if quietness and duration were opposites, as if a thing had to announce itself loudly to have substance. I had accepted that framing for a long time, without fully understanding that I was accepting it. I closed the laptop without responding, left it on the counter, went to bed in a house that was quiet in a way that no longer felt like a problem. The next morning, I was in the shop before 5:30, planing a piece of white pine by the work lamp. The wood smelled the way cold wood does, clean, clear, uncomplicated, and I thought about Kara holding fence boards in the September wind for 40 minutes without being asked. I thought about the soup. I thought about the coffee she'd put in her cart without mentioning it. I thought about the small, even nod across the yard, the walk to the door without hurrying, and I thought, very clearly, in the quiet of the shop with shavings around my boots, Renee is wrong. This is not passing. This is the only thing in 3 years that has made me want to be somewhere before the alarm goes off. I knew what I needed to do. I just needed to wait until Wednesday. She came to Rose Hours at her usual time. I was already there when she came down the aisle, and she didn't look surprised to find me. She never really did. Her hand went to the green beans the way it always did, and she looked at me steadily, without performance. I picked up a bunch of kale from the display beside me. I have never liked kale, and she is fully aware of this. She glanced at the bunch in my hand. "You hate that stuff, I know." She smiled, small, real, just enough. We moved toward the registers. After a few steps, I said, "Last week what I said, I wasn't joking." She stopped walking. She did not turn right away. 1 beat, then 2, then she turned and looked at me. "I know you weren't." I held her gaze. "Were you?" She looked back, level and certain. "I've meant it for longer than you probably realize." There was nothing performed in that. It was just a fact she had been holding carefully and had now placed on the table the way she did everything, without drama, without needing a particular response. I told her then about Renee's visit. All of it, the land dispute, what she had said about Kara, the email afterward, not as explanation or defense, but because she deserved the full picture, and I had decided I was done managing information in silence. Kara listened without interrupting. When I was done, she said, "I don't need you to have no history. I just need you to be honest about right now." Then she asked, "Next Wednesday, would you want to do this on purpose?" Not by coincidence. She looked at me for a quiet moment. "You mean like a date?" "I mean like being honest." She held my eyes, and then she lifted the bag of green beans from the display and placed it in my cart. Not her cart, mine. She didn't say anything else. I stood there looking at that bag and thought about 3 years of Wednesdays, about 12 meters, about all the times I had been standing near enough to see clearly and had chosen another direction to look. Today I looked at the right thing. Some decisions don't require long words. Kara put the green beans in my cart, and for the first time in 3 years, I genuinely wanted someone to stay. She stood there in the parking lot for a moment after placing the green beans in my cart. She did not fill the silence. She had never been someone who filled silence unnecessarily, and I thought about what it must have taken, not the asking, but the years before the asking. The Wednesday afternoons when she could see that I was standing right there and I was not looking at what was in front of me, and she had chosen, each time, to simply return the following week, to bring the soup again, to hold the fence board again, to buy the coffee and say nothing, to wait. Most people, faced with that kind of waiting, would have eventually made it about themselves, would have pushed, or retreated, or reframed the whole thing to protect their own sense of dignity. She had done none of those things. She had just waited and kept showing up, and trusted that I would eventually pay the right kind of attention. That is not passivity. That is a particular kind of confidence I had never recognized clearly before. Walking through the parking lot, I thought about what it means to carry something the way she had carried it. 3 years is not a short time. 3 years of Wednesday afternoons, of soup and fence boards and small careful gestures, of saying things that could be interpreted 2 ways and allowing me to choose the easier interpretation every time. She had not grown impatient. She had not eventually forced the conversation. She had just kept showing up, every week, with the same quiet consistency she brought to everything else, trusting, I think, that I would eventually stop looking away. That kind of patience is not passive. It takes a particular type of confidence to wait for someone without losing yourself in the waiting. Kara had that. I was not sure I had ever really had it myself. I sat in the truck for a moment before starting the engine. The green beans were in the passenger seat, still in my cart from when she'd placed them there. I put them on the seat beside me. I thought about my father's land, about the hours spent in the workshop learning to make things that would outlast me, about the particular satisfaction of putting 2 pieces of wood together correctly flush, tight, permanent. I thought about the difference between building something and just occupying a space. I had been occupying a space for 3 years, living next to something I had not built anything toward. Kara had been doing the opposite. She had been building, quietly, and without making me aware of the blueprint the whole time. I started the truck. I thought about the second chair I would make for the porch. I thought about making things that last. The first Wednesday we arrived at Rosauers on purpose. Kara bought green beans. I bought kale deliberately, with full awareness of what I was doing and why. She looked at the bunch in my hand as we moved through the store. "You still hate it," I said. "You like it." She stopped walking for half a step, then kept going. I believe that was the right call. She cooked at my place that evening not as a neighbor performing a kindness, but as a person who had somewhere she was choosing to be. I washed the dishes. Nobody discussed the division of labor. It organized itself the way things do between people who are genuinely attending to the same space, rather than each staging their own performance of cooperation. When the kitchen was clean, we carried our tea out to the porch. We sat in the chairs I had made, and watched the light leave the mountains in stages the way it does here in the evenings. Slowly, the peaks holding color long after the valley has gone dim. Kara was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Did you make these chairs?" "Yeah. They're more comfortable than anything you'd find in a store." I didn't answer her. The next morning I went into the shop and started cutting pieces for a second matching one. 3 months moved through us the way winters move in Bozeman, not gently, but with a consistency that makes the cold feel like something you know how to be inside of, rather than something happening to you. By November, Kara was leaving her boots at my front door. There was no conversation about it, no announcement. One evening the boots were simply there by the wall, and then they were there again the following evening, and after the third time I put an extra coat hook on the wall by the entrance without saying anything about why I was doing it. The things that do not get spoken between two people who are genuinely paying attention to each other are often the things that matter most. I was beginning to recognize that while it was happening, rather than 6 months later, that felt like progress. The legal notice from Renee's attorney arrived on a Tuesday night in February. I read through the documents at the kitchen table, set them face down on the counter, and went to bed without mentioning it to anyone. Old pattern, worn smooth by years of practice. Handle it yourself. Don't bring your weight into someone else's space. Kara was at my place for dinner the following evening. She went to refill her water at the sink and saw the corner of the envelope where I had left it. She didn't say anything immediately. We finished dinner. We did the dishes. We sat down again, and then she said quietly, and without any performance of concern, "You don't have to manage everything by yourself anymore." I did not argue. I sat with it the way you sit with a true thing that is uncomfortable, not because it is wrong, but because you have been doing the opposite for so long that accepting it requires a recalibration. You are not quite ready to complete it a single evening. "I know," I said. "Old habit." She nodded and let it rest there. I told her all of it later that week, the full history of the parcel, what the original settlement had said or failed to say clearly, what Renee's filing was now claiming, and why I thought the argument was weak. Kara listened the way she always listened, entirely and without interjecting. When I was done, she asked one question. "Do you want to keep the land?" I said, "It was my father's." She said, "Then keep it." I know a good attorney. She handled something similar for my brother-in-law. No judgment, no weighing of the emotional complexity, just the next practical step, offered plainly, without any additional weight attached. Very few people help that way. I recognized it as something to pay attention to. Spring came late, the way it does most years up here, and when it came, Kara planted a garden on her side of the fence-line, tomatoes in the center, basil along the edges, a row of small herb pots, and at the far end, staked and beginning to climb, green beans. I saw them one morning when I came out to open the shop. Half asleep, coffee in hand, I stood at the fence for a while, looking at those bean plants barely knee-high, still deciding what direction they meant to go. I thought about the first Wednesday at Rosauer's, about the bag in the clear plastic sleeve she reached for every week without ceremony, about the one she had placed in my cart in the parking lot, about the one on the second shelf of my refrigerator on a Wednesday morning. She had planted the thing she brought me, in the ground, on her side of the fence, where it could grow. I went to work that morning smiling, alone in the early cold, in a way I hadn't in longer than I could honestly measure. One evening in early April, she fell asleep on my couch. She had been reading a paperback she'd been working through for a couple of weeks, and at some point the book slipped sideways and she went under without noticing. I picked the book off the floor and set it open on the side table. I got the extra blanket from the hall closet and laid it over her carefully. Then I turned off the lamp and sat down in the chair across the room. I just sat there, in the dark, with no phone and nothing to do, listening to the house, the refrigerator's hum, the wind against the windows, her even breathing in the quiet. I thought, this is it. This is what was missing. This specific, unhurried, ordinary thing, this particular person in this particular silence. It had been 12 meters away for 3 years, and I had been treating the distance like a principle rather than just a number. I did not sleep that night until well past midnight. I lay in my own bed and thought about the second chair I had made for the porch, how I had not explained it, had not pointed it out, had simply placed it there alongside the first one, and she had come over the following Tuesday and sat in it without remarking on it, as if it had always been there, which, in the way that mattered, it had. I thought about the hooks by the door, about the way she always put items back facing forward on the grocery shelf, about the 40 minutes with the fence boards and no conversation needed, two people who both pay attention to the details of things, living 12 meters apart, operating in parallel for 3 years before it occurred to either of them, or, more accurately, before it occurred to me to simply close the distance between the two lines. I had all the evidence I needed. I had been standing in it every Wednesday for 3 years. The following Wednesday I was up before her. I came out to the kitchen to start the coffee and opened the refrigerator, and on the second shelf there was a bag of green beans in a clear plastic sleeve. She had bought them the previous afternoon and left them there, not at her house. Here, in my refrigerator, on the second shelf. I stood in front of the open door for a long time. I wasn't cold. I wasn't looking for anything else. I was just standing there, holding the door, looking at those green beans. Kara never said the words first. She did not need to. She had been saying them for 3 years in every other language she had available: a bowl of soup, a coffee can of nails, a specific brand of dark roast she had never bought for herself, boots by the door, and a question asked of me rather than of the situation surrounding me. A bag of green beans on the second shelf. That was the sentence. It was complete. Now, telling this from where I sit, I can trace the shape of it clearly. She noticed me from the very first day: the borrowed wrench in the rain, the soup, the first Wednesday in the produce aisle. The coffee in the brown bag was not for her. The answer she gave me that October afternoon was not an impulse. It was something she had been holding patiently for a long time, waiting for a moment when I might actually be ready to hear it. She did not pressure me or give me a deadline. She just kept showing up every Wednesday with green beans and held fence boards in the wind and asked whether I was okay when no one else thought to. People say love has to be loud to be real. Renee was loud. Kara has never been loud. But everything she did had weight. The soup, the hammer, the coffee, the boots by the door, the green beans on the second shelf. Her answer in the produce aisle was the truest thing anyone has said to me in years, because she was not asking whether I had feelings for her. She was asking whether I had the honesty to stop explaining them away, whether I was willing, finally, to just look at what was already there. I was. Later than I should have been, but still in time. Sometimes the person meant for you lives 12 meters from your front door. They have been there, quietly, waiting not for you to become someone different, just for you to pay attention. Have you ever had someone that close and taken that long to see them? Or are you the one waiting right now? If you were Kara, would you have held on for 3 years, or would you have said something first? If this reached you, hit like. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And leave a comment. Team say it first, or team wait for the right moment. I read every single one.